Welcome to Dynamic Leadership. These live events are where I explore practical tools for navigating pressure, complexity, and change. First, through the 7-step reset for crushing anxiety, then self mastery for agency and personal leadership in any setting. And now I'm into building the high performing team, starting with one-to-one leadership. Now, clearly, the team will be, let's use 6 to 12 people as a team. And I know there could be larger ones, like in a call center, you may have one person reported with 25 direct reports. But what I'm talking about are teams that are actively working through things constantly. There's changes, there's operations, there's project. And this one-to-one is important because each person on that team has a different temperament and threshold in different categories. So one person may have a lot of resiliency. Another person may have a great depth for understanding broad concepts, but they might not have good adaptive skills, for example. And none of this is judgment. It's why one-to-one is important. And more so because the leader has so much leverage because of the disparity gap between the leader and the employee. Now, the leader doesn't think of it that way because you're widgets in, widgets out. You're doing this today, you're doing that tomorrow, and everything is this, what's going on today, and you handle it. To that employee, on one extreme, you might have somebody who is constantly thinking that they're going to get fired, and you don't say hello to them. This sounds crazy, but I've talked to employees. They're concerned that the manager didn't say hello to them the same way or didn't say hello at all. And now they literally have gotten that from didn't say hello to, I wonder if I'm going to get fired. You've seen this happen with during layoffs. When people know a layoff is coming, there's all this chatter and people get themselves riled up. On the other end of the spectrum, you might have somebody who thinks they're ready for promotion. And every time something goes a little bit wrong, they think that it's not going to happen. Either one of those could create this fight or flight in the employee. And when you have fight or flight in the employee or direct report, I know we have virtual teams. It's not always employees, it's contractors, et cetera. But even with contractors, if you're a major source of their income, they still have that same feeling. I know Stephen Covey used to talk about it as the rice bowl. But the point is, their livelihood is so important. Now, most leadership and project failures don't happen because of gaps in motivation or skills. They happen because people don't care, they lack capability, or aren't working. They don't happen because people don't care, lack capability, or aren't working hard enough. They happen because the work gets organized too late, when options are fewer, emotions are already involved, and everything costs more. Now, today I'm introducing a deceptively simple tool, the design blueprint, not as a project management document, but as a sequencing device for leadership alignment. The real advantage in leadership isn't just speed, it's sequencing. When the right clarity is established early enough, the system never fully enters confusion, conflict, or fight or flight. Recovery becomes small, fast, and often invisible. This is why elite teams don't train only to perform, they train to prevent errors. Because once the opponent is in your face, every correction costs energy, trust, and momentum. Just use the example of driving around on a road that you don't know, a curvy road. You're paying attention because small misalignments can turn into catastrophic. You've got a 2-lane road, you have traffic coming the other way, and a small misalignment, if you catch it early, it doesn't matter. People in the car don't even know you're making adjustments. But if you wait too long, you could be across the yellow line or you could be in the ditch. This is a great example of how early recoveries are significant when it comes to stabilizing the system. And in this case, the system would be the organization. Now, the blueprint reverses the usual sequence. It puts effectiveness before efficiency. By defining what we're doing, for whom, and why, making scope explicit, and agreeing on guiding principles up front, we remove the ambiguity before it becomes an idea, let alone friction. We also give people curbs by defining what the deliverables are and and we provide enough structure to create direction, enough autonomy to engage ownership and competence. Alignment alone isn't enough. Once execution begins, leaders still have to navigate gray zones, trade offs, pivots, competing priorities, and energy constraints. That's where the frameworks I'll draw today come in. It's a simple tool, but it's useful to help leaders hold on to the tension that's necessary while the rest of the team catches up. When I talk about holding tension, it's one thing to get there yourself, handle your own situation, but again, one to one, different people come in at different times. That's why they have early adopters. There's late adopters. Some people get on board really quick. Other people need to figure things out. If you look at Myers-Briggs, the S's want the detail and concrete first. The N's need the big picture and conceptual first. It's not either. It's not either or. It's which one is more useful when they're trying to understand something. But you'll have a variety of these on your team. When I was building high performing teams, I got into the habit, because it worked so well. Every new team I was creating, I took the senior leadership team through the Myers-Briggs. And I went through with them. So I've done Myers-Briggs at least 7 times, going through the whole full presentation where you're doing the report in advance, the assessment in advance, and then you get the report, you read it, and then you come in this facilitated session, and they do exercises to show you how significant the differences between the S and the N. They put the S's in one group and the N's in another group, and this happened every single time I took it. The outcome, and they give both sides the same case study, and every single time the S's, it's more about doing the same but doing it better, communicating better, communicating in a different way, helping people. The N's, they were always changing this and changing that to make it work. You need both. One is not better than the other. And I made sure that I had a mix on my team. If I had too many S's, I went looking for an N to add to the team. And the same way when I set up a project team, I want N's and S's. I want both. I want the big picture people, and I want the concrete and detailed picture people. You need both. So the frameworks are a way to hold that tension, and that tension is going to be there because different people come in at different times. Now, a simple directional model to understand pivots and momentum and strategic tension matrices that help leaders hold opposing truths without defaulting to reaction is what we need. Something easy that you can do quickly. And for me now, it's a habit. If I'm hearing that kind of tension happening, and it's not about the work stalling, it's not about trying to preempt something. It's when we start going into a circle because of the tension, and then we just draw the framework. And by having the guiding principles up front, which we'll talk about on when we get to the template, it's easy to decide which, because you already decided. You decided that at the blueprint level, at the alignment level, you already know. If I put profit and growth down, you already know which one is the priority for this year. Together, the blueprint aligns the system. The frameworks help you navigate it, and the leadership cues help you know when to change, how to communicate, and decide before problems harden. This is back to the early correction on that road. If you correct early, you don't need major changes. You just need slight adjustments, the same way a plane does when it's flying across the country. It's making all these small adjustments. You can't feel it, but if you sit in the cockpit, you see them constantly moving, or the autopilot doing it in the airliners. Now, before we dive in, I want to offer 3 observations to keep as anchors as we go. And these are just some blurbs to help us kind of set the table, if you will. So one is prevention beats regulation. What looks like constant presence is usually rapid recovery. When sequencing is right, we prevent unnecessary spikes instead of managing fallout. And when I talk about prevention in this context, it's not preventing the blip from happening, because no plan survives contact with reality. You're going to get blips. It's about preventing the blip from becoming larger. And a large enough blip becomes a car in the ditch, to stay with that same metaphor. And we need to correct these at the small blip level, but that means you have to detect them. And that means you have to be present as the leader. This is the dynamic leadership. And I'll draw a parallel between dynamic leadership and dynamic traction and dynamic performance systems in cars. The second one is most performance issues are late intervention problems. If willpower is required, we're already behind. If you're relying on discipline, you're fighting a losing battle because discipline and willpower both wane throughout the day, and they both suffer from decision fatigue. That not only that, willpower brings in this other thing called "I don't want power," and now you have people fighting against themselves because there's something they decided they're not going to do, and that thing is now part of the new strategy. So early framing preserves energy for when it actually matters. And that's why we use a lot of, I use the word prevention, but again, it's micro recovery because you're seeing the blip and then it happens and then you adjust. When effectiveness is clear, efficiency stops being chased. Clarity removes the bottleneck that creates false urgency. Speed becomes a byproduct, not a demand. Now, the traction control. If you have most of you are aware, if you've driven in the snow in cars before 1990, before you had traction control, and you step on the pedal too hard, the tires would spin. And similarly, if you go back to the 70s, any cars then didn't have anti-lock brakes. You press on the brakes and the tires would skid in the snow. Now, if you drive a car with anti-lock brakes in the snow, you hear this because the tires rolling and stopping, rolling and stopping. What the anti-lock brakes is doing is it's detecting when the wheel spins. It has like a stroboscope that it's using, a phonic wheel, so to speak. Like you've seen them on maybe on turntables, just so you can kind of judge the speed. So it's a phonic wheel, and when that thing gets to when it stops, that means the wheel is skidding if the car is still moving, and the brakes release a little bit. It's like pumping the brakes, but it's doing it in millisecond time. You don't notice it on the street so much, but you notice it in the snow because it's not tuned for that. And that brings in dynamic traction control. So dynamic traction control, I can't speak to it on the car, but I can speak to it about motorcycles. With motorcycles, traction control does the same thing, and anti-lock brakes the same thing. So in other words, when the tire, it's tuned so as the tire tears, when that's the most amount of traction, as the tire starts to tear, that's where the traction control engages and cuts the fuel just enough. So it's constantly or retarding. It's more like retarding the spark just to cut the power just a little bit, but it's happening in such small increments and at the microsecond level. But what happens with the motorcycle, when you lean, you have less traction directionally. It's like a vector. As you lean, your traction is now split between going this way and going this way. And what dynamic traction control does is looking at the lean angle of the motorcycle, and depending on the lean angle of the motorcycle, it's retuning the traction control so it's more sensitive. As you're leaning, it's allowing even less. It doesn't wait till the wheel is sliding. It waits until it gets to a certain point. So the tires matter, obviously, but that's just an example. In the same way, it does the same thing with anti-lock brakes. They have dynamic anti-lock brakes, whereas you're leaning, the more you lean, the more it interferes to keep the wheel from sliding. The reason I went through that is because that's what dynamic leadership is. It's not about preventing problems from happening. It's about recovering so fast that there's no visible evidence that it happened. This is why self-mastery is first. So the four pillars of self-mastery, knowledge, you have to have the understanding, then the habit mastery, state mastery, and I have forgiveness in there because we don't want old wounds, especially when we're up above the line. You don't want to uncover something that that you've been holding in since you were 12 years old, and something triggers that, and then it comes out. This is one of the reasons why I say people are held back from going after their quests, because they've been in that triggered state. They've been in that out of control state, and they don't ever want to go there again. And so they avoid things. So that's the idea. Now let's go to some slides, and then I want to illustrate a couple of things. And from there, we'll look at the template. And you can get a copy of that template out at 7stepreset.com/live. I'll put a link there for it. It's an editable PDF. Now, and I'll tell you this, I'll say it again. It's a template. You can download it. It's good to uh, capture the conversation, but the conversation should be a facilitated event. It should be something you're facilitating and getting a lot of interaction. If it's just you, then maybe facilitate with a friend or accountant or attorney, somebody else who's interested in your business or has a vested interest in it. But you want to have somebody asking questions. It could be a coach, a consultant, what have you. All right. Now, dynamic leadership is aligned with emotional intelligence, and this is a big departure with the word dynamic because in when emotional intelligence was created in the early to mid 90s, we didn't have the brain scanning tools available to us to show how the nervous system and the brain are actually working. So it was still thought that for the general public, the neuroscientists were starting to uncover it, but it was still thought that the subconscious is a mind. And because it's thought of as a mind, what it handed off to the conscious mind was perceived as truth. It's not a mind, it's a network of neurons. It's energy going through neural pathways. It's very much a physiological and neurobiological system that's happening over there. And it's very predictable because the more myelin is wrapped on the neurons, the faster, stronger, and more reliably they fire, making it a path of least resistance. And that's why it's a habit. The neurons stay wrapped with myelin for the most part. It does degrade some with age, but not. It doesn't degrade with lack of use. Synapses degrades because of lack of use, because the synapses is always moving to the neural pathways that are being used, and then as they get activated, we need more neurotransmitter, but then it prunes the ones that are unused to keep the neural pathways going. This is what happens at the beginning of a season. If you feel a little bit awkward, like the first day, if you ski or snowboard or whatever, skateboarding, you feel that little, it's like awkward the first day you're out, but then it comes back. That's because the neurons are there, but the synapses is moving over. That's called synaptogenesis, and it takes hours and maybe a day or two. It's not like building muscle. That's why the stabilizer muscles, when you work with a physical therapist, they talk about activating the stabilizer muscles. You're not necessarily strengthening the muscle. You're activating the neural pathways that drive that muscle. And the reason this is important is because without that understanding, you see there's a lot of literature in emotional intelligence that talks about personality is fixed, intelligence is fixed. You can't change your identity. You can't change this. You can't change that. You can't stop that. So everything is, most of it is corrective. Most of it is reacting on the back end. And you'll see that that's way too late. And so what dynamic, that's like not having traction control at all. It's like having to pump the brakes or having to lift off the gas and correct if you go into a slide. What we're doing is going way, way upstream where the micro recoveries are happening so fast and at such small scale, it looks like a completely stable system. But we do cover the same kind of thing, right? We need self-awareness and self-management. That's self-mastery, because if you don't have self-mastery, agency, and personal leadership, you could be triggered. You could be walking into situations and being triggered. And as a leader, if you are tense, if you are preoccupied, your employees know it. And it changes things. It changes the dynamic. You don't want to be easily triggered. You don't want to be walking around with buttons that can be pushed. You want to resolve all of that. And if a button does get pushed, you want to be able to detect it early enough and have tools to mitigate it right away at the millisecond level. It doesn't start at the millisecond level. First, it's going to be seconds. It might be minutes at first. And then we get to half seconds. And eventually, it's automatic. When it's automatic, it's at the millisecond level. The same way they tell you that dynamic suspension is making thousands of decisions a second. It's really just continuous. And that's what we'll do with automaticity. It's just a habit and it becomes continuous. Then social awareness and relationship management is where we are now, because once you learn how the system operates, you can observe it in other people. It makes it easier to spot it. And by making it easier to spot, you can then help regulate the people who are reporting to you. Now, when I say regulate, I mean it differently than emotional intelligence uses it. Emotional intelligence uses regulate as a general term of what to do, but because most of it is corrective, it's talking about the corrective part. And I'm not knocking emotional intelligence. It's very valuable. It's all on point. It's just that we've learned some things in the last few decades, and neuroscience is still very, very young. You think of hunter-gatherer, we've been evolving for tens, if not hundreds of thousands of years. And the understanding we have, well, the world we live in today, 500 years ago, it didn't even exist. It's all very new. And then what we're learning in the neuroscience world is less than a century old. So you can see we're at the infancy. We're not even born yet, if you think about it like in the context of evolution. So when I talk about regulate, there's three parts of it. There's the similar to prevention, there's the micro recovery level, which happens way early. It's so early it looks like prevention, but it's actually just really quick responding. And then we have the modulating, and the modulating is that's what we talked about with emotional modulation. So as the emotion is coming in, you let that 90-second crest happen, and you're learning from it, you're labeling it, you're locating it, you're allowing it to process. So it's energy in motion, and it goes on instead of getting lodged into a neural pathway, becoming a feeling, becoming an event, becoming a neurobiological event that can be triggered later. And then on the back end, you have regulation. But even in this, my regulation that we talk about in dynamic leadership is happening within the first couple of seconds. It's not after the fact. Once you have cortisol and adrenaline flowing through your body, or your employees do, it could be hours. We've all been there. You've had an adrenaline spike. Hours later, you're still off kilter. We don't need that. We can avoid all of that with this process. So the point is self-mastery here, and that gives us tools to be better at social awareness. We see things, we can detect them early, and then we have tools to intervene early as well as during, as well as post. There's the 7-step reset, and this is where we're talking about right here, step 3 and step 4. We've covered this, and we've covered this. The big part of recovery is we want 712, 712. We're constantly returning to presence, and then we're using the best of what we know, and we're making sure that we are present and in a positive or productive state, mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. This cycle is happening tens of thousands of times a day. This is continuous. You have to do this continuously. You can't sit and let something just fester and grow and grow and grow, because it's going to impact every future, every subsequent stimulus and reaction and response. And here's what we're talking about. The 7 phases of a 1-second model. And I don't expect people to remember this, but I break it out so you can see what's going on. So this is the conscious mind side. This is the network of neurons side. This is the stimulus. This green mark is the stimulus. The pre-listening happens before the stimulus. You walk into a room, your network of neurons is already, the central nervous system and the brain is already scanning to see what's possible in this particular situation. Then you have, once the stimulus happens, this all occurs, these 2 boxes occur in a quarter of a second. So if you look up what's the reaction time of the subconscious, it's going to tell you it's a quarter of a second. That quarter of a second is not just a delay waiting to happen. It's the subconscious processing. And it's before you're even reacting. The initial detection is looking, cognitive biases come in play here, meta programs, bundling, which is a bundle of neural stimulus reactions, things that have happened all the time. It's like a bundle of paths of least resistance, a bundle of habits, if you will. And meaning happens here. And then there's a rapid appraisal. Once it takes that, then it figures out what's going on. Now remember, this is processing at 11 million bits per second. So you've got a couple of million potential bits already processed in this, just in this section here. Then it starts turning it into a reaction. This is the reaction. So it's if you look at one of those videos where somebody puts a cucumber behind the cat and the cat jumps, there's a moment See, the cat has a reaction time of like 40 to 50 milliseconds. And so there's a moment when they see it and then they jump. That's what's going on here, the initial detection and the rapid. But we have slower. Ours are slower. Ours are a quarter of a second. Athletes can get theirs down to about 150 milliseconds because they train it. Then once you have the reaction, now the reaction is typically what's happened before. That's why this is important. That's why you need self mastery, because if you don't have the self mastery, your reactions are going to be based on what worked before. But life is changing so fast that what worked before is probably not going to be the right thing you need for the future. And that reaction is then converted into, because it's a signal going through a neural pathway, it's converted into something that can be perceived by the conscious mind. So like a thought, bodily sensation, it's an emotion, a feeling, a picture, something that the conscious mind can perceive. And then ideally, this is where you pause. But see, people try to put that pause into place after this is all off and running. Once this is off and running and this is handing off some scary thing to the conscious mind, it's too late to pause. You're spiked, right? So what we do is we change everything over here. This is happening in milliseconds, 11 million bits per second. This is happening 50 bits per second. Obviously, making recoveries over here, we can do them faster and more effectively and before the thing takes off. And that's why I call it prevention. Some of it, there is some prevention we talk about, but a lot of it is just micro recovery. And the reason at the bottom I have to know and not do is like not knowing, and that because we will go to workshops, we get more training, we read more books, and we treat things like we we treat things like the solution is knowing more, but the reality is the solution is getting us to use more of what we know. I'm not against learning more. I do content, but it's about doing more of what you know, and that's what this process does. Let me just make sure. I've had some audio issues. I want to check my sound because I've had, yeah, okay. I've had audio issues and didn't know them until the end. I redid everything and just to make sure to eliminate that, to apply prevention because correcting wasn't working. Right, now, so here's what I've done. I've taken the first 600 milliseconds. So this pre-listening is about 100 milliseconds. Then you have, this is another 100 to 150 milliseconds. That's initial detection. And this is like readiness. This is poise. What's going to happen here? Then the next one is your orientation and then your mobilization. So I took the 600 milliseconds and broke it into tenths, 2/10 at a point. So we have the first third, middle third, and the last third, because what we can do is different at each one. For example, in the pre-listening, that's before anything ever happens. The stimulus hasn't even occurred yet, but people walk around with a perpetual question. And on one end of the spectrum, that perpetual question can be something like, what's wrong with this picture? That's not really the question, but they're saying, what's wrong with me? Or why can't I do anything right? Or what's wrong? What's wrong with these people? Or what's next? Now what? That kind of thing. It's like always looking for the other shoe to drop. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have the person, what's good about this? What can I leverage here? Where's the opportunity? What's missing that people aren't? What are people missing? And they're looking for the positive. What you need is a balance, and more importantly, because I'm not going to say one is good, one is bad, but they can be productive or unproductive depending on your quest. That's why we start with purpose. Once we know the purpose, we can formulate a better perpetual question. So that's something you could change. Just changing your perpetual question is going to reduce the number of stimulus response cycles you have in a day because some of the things just won't raise to the level of this matters. The next one is and then we have orientation. So orientation is sort of like the meaning from the perspective. If you walk into a crowded room with a friend, one of you is looking to the left, one's looking to the right, and you walk out, you could have a different view of what was taking place in that room because you saw different things. This is how people can go and have the same exact experience and explain it completely differently. And they're both like 100% bought into what they're saying. And then you have the mobilization. This is all still on the network of neurons side. We haven't got to the conscious mind side. So we're doing all this work over here. And to the point where at the end, if the beginning of this is the perpetual question, the end of this would be the reticular activating system filtering through not just what gets picked up by the conscious mind, but how. You can do more than just have the reticular activating system filter by your goals. You can train the reticular activating system to orient the reaction in such a way. For example, I like to have it present to my conscious mind a quick definition, clear definition of the problem. Right. First step of problem solving is clearly identify the problem. If a problem came up, I want to use that high processing speed of this side to come up with what is the clear definition of the problem. And then, of course, we have the conscious mind. We're not talking about the conscious mind today. That gets into action, and you have the skills. You know what to do. We have to get you do more and get people to do more of what they know. So this is perpetual question. Another thing you could do is implementation intentions. If they do this, I'm going to do that. If it goes this way, I'm going to do this. It's like you're deciding what your response will be before it happens. You can practice this. You can say, I'm going to walk in the room. If so-and-so is already there, I'm going to sit here. If so-and-so is not there, I'm going to sit over here. It doesn't matter. That's something that doesn't matter, but it teaches you to start having implementation intentions. If I'm the first one in the room, I'm going to sit here. If I'm the last one coming into the meeting, I'm going to do this. It keeps you from having that moment when you walk in and you're looking around at the chairs. You already know. You already have a plan. That'll teach you how fast and how effectively the perpetual question works. That's the pre-listening. And then implementation intentions is what I was just talking about. The next one, the orientation, conditioning, trajectory bias. So we do a positivity exercise where, remember, the network of neurons is myelinated and high synapses in neural pathways that creates a path of least resistance, which is the habit. Your reaction to things is habitual. And if you want to change your personality, your outcomes, your identity, you can't change. Those are constructs. You're not going to change them at the personality level or the identity level. You have to change them at the element level, which is back on the network of neurons side. So we condition in the new desired reaction, and that reaction leads to a recommendation to the conscious mind and then a response. But the positivity exercise takes the subconscious from being biased towards threats and negative things coming in. So it takes a neutral stimulus and looks for what's bad about it, what's the threat. Instead of that, we have it be neutral or even look at the positive. And that's a training. It takes 6 weeks that you do on your own, 90 seconds, a set, 3 sets a day. 3 sets a day for 6 weeks, 90 seconds is less than 5 minutes for the whole day that you're putting into this. It's the same way if you were training your dog. You could walk in and spend a minute telling the dog to sit, get up, sit, get up, sit up, and go away. And the next day you do it for 5 minutes a day. Eventually the dog's going to be sitting on command. And that's the same way we train the subconscious. And then mobilization, this is where we can use anchors, because by this time you're starting to sense something's coming up. Even though the conscious mind has a reaction time of 500 milliseconds, the sensation is already happening, because that's what fight or flight is. It's that sensation that's coming up. And what we want to do is go to focus and engage. So when it starts coming up, we have an anchor. And an example of the anchor I use, I do a ritual every morning, 10 minutes of 15-second inhale, 15-second exhale. And that's a calming period. It's early in the morning, first thing. And what I'm doing is not just breathing, but I am oxygenating, I am hydrating. So I drink a liter of water during that 10 minutes as well, or just before. And then, but what I'm doing with the breathing is anchoring to a state as well. So this way, if something comes up that I wasn't expecting during the day, I just take a breath. Now, remember, this is at the millisecond level. Just by taking that breath, it's an anchor back to that point. I am intending it to be an anchor so I can anchor back to that calm state. And now I'm already back to kill because I'm not facing tigers. This system, the way it's set up, is designed for tigers on the Serengeti, and we're just not seeing that. So alignment is what it's about. We want alignment. I was using the example of the car. We want early detection of misalignment and adjusting it quickly. So misalignment always precedes confusion, and the more alignment points exist, the fewer misalignment pathways remain. Confusion is not a people problem. It's a systems problem. Leaders are the primary signal source, whether intentional or not. Now, this bullet, it's not a people problem. It's a systems problem. This would be like a person driving who knows how to drive, but they're choosing to look away. Now, yeah, it's probably a people's problem because they're choosing to look away on a curvy road, but you can see their system is off. If they're not looking at the road where they're going, if they're acting like a passenger instead of a driver, I'm calling that a systems problem because they know how to drive. They're making a choice that for some reason they've chosen, and that problem creates this misalignment. And next thing you know, they're overcorrecting. Same way in stop and go traffic. The same, you could use the same example. Threat responses scale before you can see them, and that's important because you are literally starting to escalate well before you see it, which is why I say micro recoveries that makes the system look like it's completely stable continuously. I've mentioned the cortisol and adrenaline, and teams don't react to words first, they react to signals. And leaders are always giving off signals, whether they mean to or not. Not giving off a signal is a signal. So if you're responding consciously, you're already too late. Micro recovery is the leader's first responsibility. But I would say before that, you need the detection. And that's why it's dynamic leadership. And that's why you have to be grounded as the leader because you're picking up these signals. You don't want to be off because then you're going to misinterpret signals. You have to be grounded and centered, high coherence, so that what you're picking up is as accurate as possible. A map is not the territory, but you want your map to be as close to the territory as possible. And the way to do that is to be in high coherence. When you're in high coherence, you don't have the rigidity and the chaos internally that leads to misinterpretation, unnecessary misinterpretation. I've already talked about the micro recoveries, and I just mentioned the coherence. Presence is not the absence of reaction, it's the speed of return. That's the thing we want to keep coming back to. Leaders design the recovery environment. People don't just perform tasks, they operate inside systems. Systems either amplify threat or support recovery. Pace, pressure, clarity, and predictability matter. And this is all supported by this alignment document, template, which I'll get into in a few minutes. Dynamic leadership works upstream. That was the example I was using about the traction control. It may look like the car is perfectly handled. If you've ever had a powerful car with traction control and turned it off, you get a sense of what that traction control is doing constantly. I talk about most work happens in the first 600 milliseconds. This is where the battle is. You've got to get that first 600 milliseconds taken care of. I'm talking about after a stimulus, after a change. No plan survives contact with reality. When that impact comes in, you want to be ready for it. As opposed to the person thinking that I have this great plan, it's going to work, and I'm going to stick with this plan, and they're getting all these signals that it's not right, and they just keep going. Dynamic leadership sequences regulations so fast that large corrections are unnoticed. So we're not just training leaders, we're training the leadership system so we can make better use of systems around us and what we know. That enables continuous micro recoveries that make outcomes look like stability. So let's do some quick illustrations to drive the point home. If you think about this as your direction of travel, this is your mission or vision, and think of this as 12 o'clock. What you have then is you can decide that everything from about 8 o'clock around to 4 o'clock is the no zone. And you can also say that about 30 degrees around your direction is acceptable. So we can have these borders be purpose, passion, interests. Now, this would be if you're an individual. If you're an organization, you would have something similar, but you can get the point that there's a series of things you're going to use. And this is like in scope, out of scope, etc. That's what we do there. But then there's some things you just don't deal with. This is how it's easy to ignore some things. And putting some labels on this, you have 11 o'clock, which is 30 degrees off your center, 1 o'clock, which is 30 degrees. So you can pivot. And there's a lot of parallels with energy. But just imagine if you were riding a bicycle at 20 miles per hour, you can very easily pivot 30 degrees without changing your speed. You try to pivot 45 degrees or 90 degrees, you can't do that without changing your speed. And 45 degrees, which would be about 1030, is just dubious if you're going as fast as you can. Obviously, if you slow down, then you can make that 45 degree. If you slow down a lot, you can make the 90 degree, but you're going to have to come to a micro stop almost to get to this direction. You're going to slow down to very low single digits. And then we have the 4 o'clock and the 8 o'clock. And this is the idea. So if you use a clock face, then you also see that we probably have something over here and something over here, whereas this is still could be in consideration, but this requires strategic alignment, realignment. These are strategic changes. This here, you might have a meeting, something you consider later, decide to sequence it, what have you, but this is what you can do all the time. That's one way of looking at what this alignment document will do for us. It creates this, it gets us aligned, and it's not just the theory of mentioning it, it's having leaders, your senior leadership team in a room, going through the process of thinking through what this all means. And then I mentioned frameworks. I use these strategically in a conversation. When I notice that people are struggling, and they're struggling not because they don't know or not because there's something really difficult, but they're solving two things at the same time or over solving for one. So it's effectiveness on one end. This is the one that's running in my head all the time, because it's not that one is better than the other. It's that we want to be effective first and then worry about efficiency. So you go to effective and you may be here, but you're not very efficient. And then you work on efficiency. And that gets you a balance. And then you work on effectiveness. And once you're effective, you work on efficiency. And that gets you the balance. Others, like sufficient and ideal, this is like don't let perfection become the enemy of the good. Don't let perfection be enemy of the good. And the idea is sometimes good enough is enough. You don't want going after perfection to become the problem there. So this one is more fixed, whereas this is dynamic. You're going effective, then efficiency, effective, then efficiency. This is for that project or that quest or that innovation, sufficient and ideal is enough. You have stable, and I'm not saying these are the ones to use. I'm just throwing out some examples, and then you can come up with things on your own. And we have adaptability. So I would say come up with some things that where you notice in your organization you constantly have these. It could be what and how. It could be accuracy and speed. It could be growth and profit. It's helpful to have these because you want to hear when a team member is starting to oversolve or overweight for one side or the other. And then the last thing I want to do is draw a quick illustration of what I see happening with the difference between dynamic micro recoveries and waiting too late. So if you say that this is a minute, and in that minute, you're going to have a series of stimulus response cycles. Assuming that you're awake 65,000 seconds a day, and assuming that we make 30,000 or so have 30,000 stimulus response cycles, you're going to have 6 of these. So these are all the stimulus response cycles. And if I blow that up, and we have 1, so these are the stimulus response cycle, and this is return to presence. We want coherence here. That's what we want. But if you have a situation where you don't have the coherence, 2 things happen. 1, you can get more stimulus response cycles because you're agitated, and this is what you see when a person is triggered, they're cycling up. But the other thing, you don't return to coherence. So if these are returns, this one is constantly going up. This one goes up, and then another trigger goes up, another trigger goes up. And if you've ever seen somebody catastrophize, then it starts to exponentially climb. And by here, you have adrenaline and cortisol. It's a neurobiological event. It could be a phobia or what have you. This is what we're preventing. This is just an example of it so you can have a picture of what I was talking about with the network of neurons side. And this is micro recoveries. This is allowing it to get off track. And most people are living somewhere in between there, but we can do this on purpose. Now, again, this is a template. It's editable. You can save it as another name and then reuse it. But I wouldn't start with filling this out because you're going to be forcing yourself into the slots. They're there so that you can capture the conversation after the flip chart exercise. I like the flip chart exercise because you can group things, you can cross things off, you can go back to things. What about this? What about that? You get different people's input. People are giving input, you're getting it all out there. It's like, it just works. And then what you can do is put the refined statements here. And this becomes the group's view. And the group knows they're not going to go through this level of depth. I've used this for $1 million projects, multi-million-dollar projects, 2-year projects, 2-month projects. And when of the bigger projects, we have multiples of these because there's one at the big project level and then one for each of the sub project levels. And some of those will have their team leads do the same thing. It depends on how much they like it. But the point is, by walking through this in advance, so the what are we doing, and this supported vision, this is like the sponsor who's paying for it. It's not the end user. We don't want to capture the end user here. And then why? And if I'm working with an individual, I might ask the question why 5, 6, 7 times to really figure out what is it that we're talking about. And then we have scope. Notice the in scope is larger than the out of scope. The reason for that is we're going to list the things that are in scope. And this is not a project management document. It does get handed off to the project manager and it does get into the PMO, but it's a leadership alignment document. So when you make changes to this, it goes back up to the leadership team. So we've locked in the scope as the leadership team. And the outer scope is smaller because we don't need to list everything that's out of scope. There's thousands of things that we're not going to do, but there's 3 or 4 things that people feel like it's logical to have them in here. For example, if you're changing your CRM, how you work through the CRM, one of the things that might be out of scope is changing the CRM platform. You're going to stay with the CRM platform. You're just having it customized, as an example. Do you want to list those things so people know up front? And it's just in the no zone. People don't even think about it. Guiding principles is important, or are important. I think you get to the point where you start using. I know one that shows up for me all the time is under promise, over deliver, and begin with the end in mind. Those two show up. But you're going to start showing, and these should be aligned with your vision and your mission. Obviously, they should support the quest. By doing this as a group, everybody gets their pet thing out on the table and they get captured. And you want to make sure if you have a group, you're not going to have a guiding principle for every single person, but we want to synthesize and group them and come up with a representative guiding principle so everybody's voice is not just heard, it's reflected on the document. Then we have the deliverables. This is pretty straightforward. What are we delivering? These are the buckets. These become the sub projects. These become outcomes. And then we have the mutually agreed upon requirements. I'd like to put the requirements in up front. Now, these are going to shift, but you can come back to them. But these are high level leadership team mutually agreed upon requirements. And this is how we're going to measure quality later. This keeps us from having the goalposts that move. Too often, leaders or team or organizations will come up with a plan and then they learn things and they start moving the goalposts. The other thing this document does is it helps you when you look at the deliverables, you want to identify which of these is going to be the most difficult and consider making a phase 2 and doing it at the leadership level. Your project teams don't like phase 2 in most cases because they feel like they never get done. But if you do a phase 2 at the leadership level, at the PMO level, and say, we're going to do these deliverables first, and this deliverable won't start until this point because we're going to learn some things with these other deliverables, and we're going to push this deliverable out into the future at some point to be determined later, but it's already funded. Now what you're going to do is, this is the project, this is the 20% deliverable that takes 80% of the time. This would be the deliverable that causes projects to go over cost, and over time, it's like I said, the 20% of the project, but it takes 80% of the time. And you can see why that creates a problem. The rest of the document, again, it's more of a tool to use. It may fit, it may not, but I put some categories on here. But the first part is what you want to do in the facilitated session. This is a good place to capture other points that come up, risks, what is some mitigation, because these things are going to come up and you don't want to shut them down. You want to capture them, and then it becomes something that you can hand off and the PMO has it. But this is something I would think through, and that is, what is it that we want to do what are we going to do first? And that should not be the first box. It should be, where do we want to end? You start. Let me restate that. When you want to decide what the first box is, you don't start with the first box. You start with the end, and you build forward. To have this, what do we need before it? To have this, what we're going to need, and to have this, and that process is called the Merlin method, Merlin. It informs what you should do first. And I put an eight-step box there because 4 is, going to be pretty high level. But the point is, you want to begin with the end in mind and work your way forward. And you'll find out that what you plan to do, what you would have planned to do, which is typically what you did before, that's what this stops. It stops you from doing what you did before. The other thing we do here is we revise your statement. So remember, I said you're not going to include customers up front. So after you do this, we have a place here where you can clarify your statement again. So you take all of this and say, okay, here's what we're doing. This is not quite an elevated pitch. It's basically a 1 or 2 sentence statement of what we're going to do. And then you do it again here before you go into the Merlin. This becomes very, very useful for the project management team. Now the leadership team will interact typically with the PMO, with the project manager. So you're going to have some iterative work here, and there might be some refinements, but this thing goes a long way in helping fill in the blanks. It supports autonomy and lets them do what they know how to do. Now, just to summarize, we talked about mental rehearsal for above the line. We talked about implementation intentions, perpetual question. This is what we're doing. We're removing a lot of this taking it out of play. When we are doing something new, a new quest, going above the line, this gets in the way. And it's important because getting through this barrier is only part of the problem. The bigger part is the unknown and the unfamiliar up here. This is where you really need the self mastery, because you're going to have unfamiliar things coming at you. If you don't have a trained subconscious when you get above the line, just think about that. It's seeing things in the milliseconds, second level, 11 million bits per second. It's looking for the scary things. Everything's a threat. It's bombarding you with all this, and it's no wonder people get overwhelmed when they're doing something new. It's a subconscious issue, not a person issue. And the subconscious is a network of neurons, and you can reprogram your network of neurons. And we want to be able to have this strengths, consistency, based on strengths, consistency, and simplicity. We just want to keep moving along this line. We know what our parameters are. We know what our KPIs are. And we're just not dealing with this. This stuff comes in the no zone. You may make a note of it and come back to it later, but you're not dealing with this stuff anymore. All right, I go live every weekday, Monday to Friday, 7 o'clock. Typically, sometimes I'll go at 8 o'clock, depending on what's on my schedule, if I have to go later. And on Wednesdays, I do an Ask Me Anything. That Ask Me Anything is geared towards high-performance teams. We can talk about the self-mastery. We can talk about dynamic leadership. We can talk about emotional intelligence. But the idea is using dynamic leadership to build high-performing teams. In February, I'll continue with the one-to-one team leadership. And then in March will be executive leadership and one-to-many to set the climate and creating the environment. And then on Thursday of this week, I have the 4 pillars of self-mastery. So this is a workshop where you actually do the work. You learn the skills. We reset your subconscious. You practice the tools to reset it. Now, we don't do it for the big things. We do it for little things so you can learn the process, and then you go off with the step-by-step to apply it to the big things. And that's this week. You can go to that website, 7steptransformation.com, self-mastery-2. And I'll see you tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll start talking about onboarding, because this is where you could get a sense of what your people are like. This is where the one-to-one comes into play. All right, we'll see you tomorrow.